Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joined us for this lecture this evening here in New York, or it might be something else depending where you are. So thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome David Maisel for tonight's I3 lecture. And as I recall, David, I think our paths may well have crossed somewhere around 2008 when you had just completed the Library of Dust series. Before then, and certainly since, you have built an extensive and impressive resume, and I'd like to share some of that with our audience. So David Maisel was born in New York and works across photography and video. He's currently based in San Francisco. His creative practice is primarily concerned with the politics and aesthetics of radically altered landscapes, in particular, those environments that are human altered, and more specifically, those spaces that are quarantined and hidden from view. The projects are many years in the making and require detailed research and careful negotiation with different authorities. The resulting photographs have been exhibited widely across the globe, including at such notable venues as the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, DC, the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia, and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, South Korea, among others. He is represented by several galleries, with his most recent solo exhibitions being presented by the Edwin Hauck Gallery in New York and the Haynes Gallery in San Francisco. He has also been recognized with several awards, including being named a Guggenheim Fellow in the Creative Arts in 2018. For those of you in the audience who are keen photo book collectors, you can find his work published by the likes of Radius Books, Ivory Press, Nazreli Press, and Stidel. His work is also represented in a number of different anthologies and journals. David's artworks can also be found, unsurprisingly, in something like 35 plus museum collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum of Art, Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington, DC, as well as the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and the list goes on. So David, thank you so much for making time to join us for the I3 lecture program. It's really good to have you here, and I shall now hand over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a beautiful, lovely introduction. We're really living in this kind of extraordinary moment, this exceptional time globally with the pandemic, but also, as we were just discussing before we got started here, environmentally, with the drought-induced season of wildfires that we experienced here in California last summer and fall, and that no doubt we're actually going to be experiencing again. In fact, we already are experiencing it. It's very, very early in the season, but it kind of makes for an apt backdrop for me to be talking about my work, which, as Deborah said, focuses on ways that we humans are changing the environment and affecting the earth, as well as now we see ourselves. So I'm going to touch on some early projects today, but I want to really focus on recent work I've been making in the Atacama Desert in Chile, and another project at Dugway Proving Ground, which is a massive military installation in our Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah, where chemical and biological weapons are developed and tested. So let's begin by looking at a few spreads from the Proving Ground monograph. I'll hold it up. And this came out last year from Radius Books. And with it, I'll offer you a quote from the novel Underworld by Don DeLillo. A photograph is a universe of dots. The grain, the halide, the little silver things clumped in the emulsion. Once you get inside a dot, you gain access to hidden information. You slide inside the smallest event. This is what technology does. It peels back the shadows and makes reality come true. So Proving Ground is this kind of panoramic immersion into the site of Dugway Proving Ground. It's this kind of, the idea of it is that it's a kind of intensification of vision and seeing, and also just at some point reaching what I kind of feel are the limits of perception too. The Tooele Army Depot, it's an ammunition storage facility that houses 42% of the US's expired chemical weapons. There were, at the time I made this photograph, nearly 30 million pounds of aging nerve agents like sarin and taboon stored in hundreds of igloos at the incinerator. And then the weapons are burned, and it sends this contaminated ash over the waters of the Great Salt Lake, which then is mined for its mineral content. And so, you know, this image raised all kinds of alarm bells for me. And ultimately, it led to my working at the site, which was the source of many of these chemical weapons, Dugway Proving Ground, which is a classified military installation, one valley to the west of here. So we'll start looking at this project now, Proving Ground. So learning about the transformation of this landscape into a repository for toxic weaponry, you know, brought up all kinds of questions for me, like where do these chemical weapons come from? How does space become militarized and thereby off limits, kind of made to be invisible? And so I started researching Dugway. And it's about 45 miles southwest of Tooele, where that Army Depot is located. Okay, so I'll give you a little background about Dugway. Since its inception in 1942 during World War II, it's been devoted to the development and testing of chemical and biological weapons and defense programs. It has this extremely isolated setting in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah, and it has a scale of some 800,000 acres, which makes it about the size of Rhode Island, actually larger than Rhode Island. But it also makes it particularly suited to working with these virulent substances like anthrax and sarin, plague, the botulism toxin, and other chemical and biological agents. You know, parts of Dugway are used in military training exercises to simulate the terrain of Afghanistan and Iraq. So you get an idea what it's like. But in spite of its massive size, Dugway remains nearly invisible. Not only is it located by necessity in this extremely remote area, but it's also rarely discussed in the media and almost entirely closed to civilian visitors. On aeronautical charts like the one I just showed you, the militarized airspace of Dugway is labeled restricted, R6402A, and pilots are cautioned of, quote, special military activity. So despite these obstacles to access, or maybe because of them, I became captivated by the idea of making photographs there. But gaining access to Dugway took nearly a decade. In 2004, a friend of mine made an initial inquiry to the Pentagon on my behalf. And the answer, just a few years after 9/11 and under a George Bush administration, was not now. Well, not now is a lot better of a response than I anticipated. So periodically, we would make another inquiry. And in 2013, under Obama's second term, I was introduced to James Petro, the Pentagon's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Chemical and Biological Defense, a remarkable human being, a real humanist, exactly the kind of person you would hope would be in that position. And he advocated on my behalf, and I'm really forever grateful for that. So a year later, with his support and the support of the commander of Dugway, Colonel Pfizer, I was allowed to start to work there. So every site I've been permitted to photograph at Dugway has been highly vetted by layers of military personnel, except actually this one that I've been showing you. But I'm generally accompanied by at least one, if not two or three military representatives, even when I'm making aerial pictures. But I've really been granted this kind of extraordinary degree of access to work in zones that are basically usually restricted from civilian view. So this structure that I've been showing you repeatedly, it's called the Air Force Targeting Grid Building, and it has a very specific function. It and its shadow are designed to be seen from above by Air Force pilots as they make their way over Dugway in fighter jets at extremely high speed en route to the Utah Test and Training Range, which is sort of right over the hills in this image. So basically the building and its shadow are a marker set into the vast desert landscape. And that's the reason for it having this kind of distinctive soft-toothed form. And as the project developed, it kind of became an investigation into not just what happens at Dugway, but also into some of the basic structural elements of photography as a medium. Things like abstraction and seriality and sequencing and gridding and framing. The building up of these related components, basically interlinked formal devices of modernism that are also, as you'll see, rather strangely, deployed into the terrain and built structure at Dugway to become kind of measuring devices for weaponry and testing systems. Okay, and here, now we'll look at some of these open air sites of weapon testing grids from an aerial view. And in the center of the image is that same building. And you can see that kind of ziggurat profile. And I made the decision to grid, to sort of over grid each of these aerial images into 9 parts, this 3x3 grid. And so this kind of overlay of this rectilinear grid suggests mapping and this kind of cartographic urge for clarity and order and objectivity. But those are conditions that I think can be approached, but never really fully achieved. So it's that sort of push and pull between those two things. But looking down from above shows these colossal weapons testing sites that are carved into the land, these kind of nested circles and cross-hatched grids, as though the writer Jeff Maynard has suggested, the abstract drawings of Agnes Martin or Saul LeWitt have been taken to a dangerous or poisonous extreme. So the gridded landscape becomes a measuring device against which dispersal rates and toxicity levels and threats to the human body are measured. So I'm printing these images. Actually, in this instance, I'm not making these prints myself. I'm working with a lab. We're printing them directly onto aluminum in a dye sublimation process. And so each element of the grid, each of those squares, becomes 40 by 40 inches. And so the overall dimensions of these prints, these works are about 10 by 10 feet. And they're comprised of 9 separate pieces. And I wanted them, as I suggested earlier, I wanted them to be really immersive and abstracted. And the metallic prints have this kind of subtly shimmering quality, almost like a graphite drawing. These are installation shots from a solo show of Proven Ground that was mounted at the Nora Eccles Harrison Museum in fall of 2019. And the museum, which is in the same state as Dugway, was really, I think, very adventurous to mount this show, thanks to the director and chief curator, Katie Lee Coven. The museum also became a co-publisher of the Radius Book Monograph. And they organized some pretty intense public programming, including a panel with me, the environmental writer Terry Tempest Williams, who's kind of a personal hero of mine, and also Vincent Lydiard, the chief of staff of Dugway. So we had some pretty heated debates about the environmental issues that are raised by Dugway's release of toxins into the air. So I began this project, Desolation Desert, in 2018 with the support of a Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship. And here I'm bringing my focus to the vast territory of Chile's Atacama Desert. The Atacama is the highest and driest desert on the planet. It's huge. It's something like 41,000 square miles. Makes it about the quarter of the size of the state of California. And it's, it's really quite remote. And here we're looking at these isolated standing rocks that are the result of volcanic activity from millions of years ago. They seem like sentinels, kind of guarding the landscape. And they're called the monks of the Pacana, which is the geographic area in which they're located. But I'm kind of showing them really to give you context for what is the crux of Desolation Desert. in which I'm examining again from an aerial perspective these massive mining operations that are transforming this remote and highly sensitive ecoregion of the Atacama into basically an industrialized space. The desert is becoming this kind of dynamically mutating arena of mineral extraction. It's kind of like what we might think of as an operational landscape, or to use the term I mentioned earlier, a synthetic landscape. And the transformations occurring at this unparalleled scale and pace. And the earth is being kind of systematically industrialized and commodified and infrastructuralized and interconnected in order to serve this function. And the function is to extract two specific minerals, which are critical to contemporary life. And the first being lithium, and that's what we've been seeing here in this image and in the prior ones. So lithium has these unique properties. It's the lightest of all metals, it's heat resistant, and essentially it can store substantial amounts of energy in batteries for computers and cell phones and cars, electric cars, right? And so it's really fueled this kind of global rush to extract it from hard rock minerals and brines. And actually soon it'll be happening in California and Nevada as well. But in the past decade, there's been this surge in demand and surge in lithium mining in order to supply it for our iPhones and our cars and our MacBooks. And that really is imperiling the environment of the Atacama. And so as a result of this rising demand, lithium prices have nearly tripled in the past 3 years. And of course, such demand will just increase as electric cars become more common. And so for perspective, one version of the Tesla X, runs on a battery with 140 pounds of lithium compounds. And that's the equivalent of what is found in about 10,000 cell phones, one car. So the Atacama now contains this kind of complicated and sort of contradictory series of developments. The energy supplied by lithium is promoted as environmentally friendly, like an environmentally friendly alternative to fossil fuels and the industries that extract and refine them. But these mining operations in the Atacama also, they're showing this process of desert urbanization, right? And we're largely shifting the burden of energy production onto these kind of sacrificial landscapes in the southern hemisphere. And then this is the last image, and then I'm going to draw it to a close. This was the final site that I photographed in the Atacama, and it was the most remote location at the highest elevation. I was really struggling to catch my breath and to make work. Also, there was severe turbulence in the plane. But anyway, it's the Chuquicamata copper mine. It's one of the world's largest and most profitable copper mines. It's also a primary source of the Guggenheim family fortune. And of course, it's the Guggenheim Foundation that, from which I received the fellowship that allowed me to make these pictures. So I'm mentioning it not to disparage the Guggenheim. In fact, I owe them a debt for supporting this project, but I want to underscore the ways in which, although I'm sort of critiquing these processes, I'm as implicated as anyone. I'm not outside it, and I don't really know how I could be, but so I'm complicit. And I think to some degree, we all are collectively responsible for these kinds of sites. And I think with that idea, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you.